So, I don't think I'm sensitive, but I do try to listen to people. And I know a lot of people who are more sensitive than I am, and I do try to be their voice. I didn't get the song that I chose, which is fine, but I would have really wanted you to hear the song by Sarah Bareilles, I Want to See You Be Brave. That's kind of my message for all of you. And all of the talks that I really deliver are about me kind of going a little bit above or outside my comfort zone, trying things that I don't believe in, and figuring out that they are things that make a 180-degree turn on my career. And I've pivoted on so many things over the years that it seems crazy. I used to do test cases. Now I do exploratory testing. I used to believe that I need to warn people about automation. And now I know that warning about automation eats the energy that we need in developing automation. And the talk that I'm going to be doing today is basically, it's on mob programming and a particular style of communicating in a group, so that we end up learning from the others the things that we didn't even expect. Nowadays, I identify, well, I always have identified, as long as I can remember, as a tester. I am a tester at heart, but when I need to introduce myself to people who are not from the software community, I often say that I'm a feedback fairy. You know, I come to my team with a bit of news, things that they can react on, so I bring them the gift of feedback, and when they welcome that, they can actually do some awesome things with that. And the identity of a tester, I've been with that for over 20 years, but in the last 3 years, I've been adding stuff to my identity, and in particular, on this slide, what I've kind of like mentioned, I've become a polyglot programmer, and I'm kind of happy nowadays to say that I identify in that group as well. I do lots of other stuff as well, but we can talk about those things afterwards if needed. The thing that we are talking about today is learning through osmosis. Osmosis is this chemical reaction, and it speaks volumes to me because when I was growing up, I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I didn't want to be a software engineer. I wanted to be a chemical engineer. I went, as my first year in the university, I went to study chemistry. And my doctors told me that it's going to kill me, probably in 2 years, if I continue, because I'm so allergic to all the chemicals. And when I saw my friends who were not allergic to almost suffocating in some of the organic chemistry labs, I decided that maybe my doctors are right, even though I was stubbornly, going for that for a moment in time. But osmosis is kind of one of the things that, I have a history with it, and there's this idea of somehow things moving without a lot of energy or effort putting into that. So it's a reaction that makes things move without energy. And, learning usually requires us a lot of energy. So I wanted to talk about this very specific way of learning that I didn't even recognize that it was learning until afterwards I could say that I had learned something that I never would have thought was possible. So the reaction for me, this is me at a very young age, and the other one is me at a little older age. My name, Maaret, it comes from this idea of a Lappish girl, so someone from the northern Finland. So my mom used to make me wear those Lappish dresses because she thought it was cute, and that's just about the only picture that I dare to show from my childhood. But that little girl, she was raised to be self-certain. She was raised to make sure that she knows her things. At school, I remember that one of the things that really identified me that I was always prepared. I had this Swedish teacher at my school, and every time I went to the Swedish classes, she made me translate the texts. And I had this reputation in my class that I could translate Swedish word by word, exactly as it was. But nobody knew my dirty little secret. I worked like crazy translating it in advance, word by word, because I was so afraid of having to speak up in the class. So I became very much like an individual contributor And looking back still 3 years ago, when I started learning pair programming, pair testing, and actively making myself uncomfortable by working very, very closely with others, I would have said that I'm more of an individual contributor, and I'm most likely going to be uncomfortable if I have to be very close with others. So there's been a big change in that mindset, and we're going to talk about how that experience happened. So the thing that really changed my mind, in a way that I can only talk about in hindsight, I could not have told this story in advance, is finding more programming. So I want to share my story on how that happened for me. A few years ago, I was speaking at a conference in UK, Test Bash, and my story back then was that I felt very different in my team. I was back then not yet at F-Secure. I was in a different company, and I was working in this team of 10 developers as the only tester. I was the only tester. I was the person who would laugh out loud when I found a bug. Like, this is so cool! No one can do this on purpose. This is amazing, look at this. And they would look at me like, it's great that you're having fun. And, you know, they were very nice, and they fixed all the bugs, and they were saying thank you, and we had great collaboration as such. So they were welcoming the gift of feedback, but they didn't really understand why would I get so, hyped up about this whole finding bugs thing. On the other hand, when they would talk about things like JavaScript and new libraries, and let's try the C# next version, and maybe we can do it, only to some of the classes in our project, I was like, oh. So, everyone has their own thing. So that was kind of our division. We were respectful to each other, but we had very different things that we were interested in. It wasn't only that I was a tester that made me different. I was also the first woman who had worked in the software engineering discipline in that company. And there wasn't another woman anywhere nearby, because it was an engineering company. There were already very few women, and even in the software engineering, it was even narrower. So a lot of times, I needed to hear jokes and things that I thought that don't happen so much in Finland, because again, in Finland, for example, we don't have the word he and she. There's just one word for those. So some of the discussions are not quite so gendered, but in this place, I really stuck out. The things that I would do in this team is really testing. So my idea of testing was that I would go about, and instead of breaking the code, I would just, identify things that people believe in, and I would show evidence if those beliefs were not founded. So I was in the business of breaking people's illusions. Some of the illusions were around the features that we needed to build. And one of my favorite illusions really to break back then was this idea that we needed to build this feature that would take us a significant amount of time. I made the salespeople sell that feature before we built any of it, and the customer wouldn't pay 20% in advance, which actually then revealed that they would not have paid the money after all. So I was kind of identifying these different kind of illusions, and that was my job there. But when I was supposed to do anything more technical, code-oriented, maybe I would say that rather that way, I would get comments like this. I had a colleague who regularly made jokes about how women don't write anything except comments in code. And this isn't exactly an inviting thing to, go and start writing code when someone says this to you. And I was like, I was fine, like, don't touch me. I'm a tester. I don't need to code. I don't care about coding. It's not part of my identity 3 years ago. Not part of my identity. This doesn't touch me. And after the identity change, this definitely touches me. So a lot of times I realized that being a tester, it's a very gender-safe place to be in this industry, because we have amazingly equal representation in this community. And it's lovely to see in this conference how well you've succeeded on that. So that's awesome. I also identified very strongly with this dislike of programming. I don't want to do it. And it's actually funny, now that I actually do like it after 3 years, it's funny to realize that actually I wrote my first program at the age of 15. It was called Test If You're Popular. You know, girls tend to like doing tests, the women's, ladies, girls magazine tests. And I just, I wanted to program that. I put amazing amount of hours into creating this graphical art of writing one of the words in like block text so that I would, make the mouse move and get something visual on the screen. And I had completely forgotten how much I enjoyed that when I was 15. And I had somehow come to this idea that, it's not for me. And this list of programming languages, that's actually the languages that I have programmed during my lifetime so far. And I expect that to go up still quite significantly before I'm done with this industry. But it's interesting that you can program in this many languages, and you can tell yourself you are not a programmer. So, something changed. And the first change that really happened to me is that I got a daughter. And I realized that if I'm teaching my daughter that code isn't something that you will need, it's okay to, understand just these problems around this. I might be taking something away from her that otherwise would be available to her. Because again, if she doesn't know that it's not fun, maybe she can make up her own mind. So what I started doing when she was age 4 is to go into her kindergarten and teaching all of her friends, including her, that, girls and the whole group programs. And I needed to learn something, get a little bit comfortable with some of the exercises. They are not very complicated for kids, so that I can, get this idea across. And this picture is from a year ago. I bought the Linda Liukas programming books for her whole class on one of my non-profits. And again, I keep her thinking that women program, her friends program, and she doesn't need to like it, but when her friends like it, she wants to be like one of them. That's the trick on how to get women in this industry. So, friends, you play, especially girls, the social relations are really big thing. So I also tried to figure out already kind of early on what kind of other things I could do. There's a guy here, Llewellyn Falco, somewhere. I don't know where he is in the room right now, back in there. And he has this non-profit called Teaching Kids Programming in Java. And we went to different schools together, paired up, taught 12-year-old, 13-year-olds, and kind of like got some ideas there so that I would be ready to help my 2 kids, both my daughter and my son, in these kind of things. So this was a really big changer for me. But the even bigger change came with this strange idea. 3 years ago, I organized a conference in Finland called Tampere Goes Agile, and I needed a keynote speaker for that. And I invited this guy from USA. His name is Woody Zoel, and he is one of the kindest and friendliest people that I have met. Very much talks through his experiences, and he shared this story about this weird idea called mob programming. And the idea was that you can put people together so that they work on one computer, only one computer for the whole group, and that can be a really effective way of creating software. I thought this was the most ridiculous idea there was ever. I said all the things that might be on anyone's mind who doesn't know what this is really about. I said that, it looks like there's one person working and the rest of them are watching. But when I actually started looking into the dynamics, I'll explain those a little more to you, I started realizing that maybe this was something I'd like to try. And the reason wasn't that I wanted to, learn programming. I actually hated the idea that I would have to waste my days and, be there when people program and participate in that. It was a waste of time for me. But the thing that was important enough for me to want to try this with my team was the fact that we didn't collaborate too well. We had all the, challenges of sometimes not telling me what was going on or understanding what we were building and, all the regular collaboration challenges. And I was thinking maybe the programmers will end up talking to each other better if I just, create this space where that thing could happen. And that kind of drew me into this. You might see that in this picture there's this little girl there on the right. She is 9 years old. This picture is not from my work. It's from one conference, Agile conference in the USA. And that 9-year-old girl is one of these programmers' daughter. At first, they invited her to join. She said no. And then they did a bit of this mob programming exercise here, and she said, looks like a fun game. I think I can play. And joined in, bossing the programmers when it was her turn to navigate or tell what we're doing. And when she would sit in front of the keyboard, the others would tell her letter by letter what to write. So finding exactly the right level of communicating for the skills level that she had. So I thought, if a 9-year-old can do this, why couldn't I? So I started trying this out. At first, my team said, absolutely no. No way we would do this. Like, it sounds ridiculous. And I kept trying and trying, but while I was trying, I went to various meetups, and I would do this with random people that I could get together. I did TDD katas, I did some kind of testing exercises, all sorts of things, like whatever I could do. Different languages. I started getting comfortable with, working with random people and trusting that they would be okay with me. And that was seeing that everyone in the groups was very nice to me was a very important experience to me. But finally, I also got my team to try this. And the excuse was, you seem to like me, you seem to be, okay with me. I really, really want this experience. Please do it for me. And they said, oh, how could we deny when you ask that way? Like, why did I get this before? Like, why didn't I realize that I can just, ask something that I want personally? And it's a very powerful thing. It's okay to want things. There doesn't have to be this, overarching big ideal for all of these things. So I got to try it with my team. And I remember the first time I sat with my team and mob programmed. We did a refactoring exercise. We had an external facilitator present. And I don't think I've been as afraid as I was in that particular case. I knew I would be discovered as a fraud. I hadn't been actively working with code for ages. They seriously will need to tell me to write letter by letter. And this coming with a group that already made the jokes about women don't write anything but comments in code. Kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I did that anyway, for the benefit of the team. That's my idea. And I realized that I sat in front of the keyboard once, and they would tell me letter by letter. I sat there again, and I had already seen everyone else doing things there, and I already knew what they were doing. So I started kind of by osmosis, picking up things like, oh, I can see that was already done. I can model after that, and I can do that again. And after the first session, we started doing this as an exercise, learning exercise, on different kind of activities on a weekly basis. So it really was a good thing to do. But for me personally, the really big part of getting into this was to feel safe in a place where I wouldn't necessarily feel safe if I thought of all the aspects that there were on this. So for me to pick up all those details, my mind needs to be awake. And one of the best mechanisms was that after I had panicked on the keyboard because I needed to be there and on the spot and listen to others and do whatever they're telling me, I could just go away and now I'm out of the circuit for a moment. And at that moment when I had this deep breath out and I was free from the keyboard, that was the moment when I could listen, and that's where I felt safe. And when the code wasn't mine, there's a lot of helpful, usually men, but also women out there, who give me loads of comments so that my code that I check in is as perfect as possible. But it's kind of overwhelming when everyone is so helpful. So none of this would happen because it wasn't their code or my code, it was our code. So that was a very different thing. So I felt very safe in a mob, safe in a way that I would not have felt in a pair with someone who I know that believes that women can't do this anyway. I started noticing things that happened with my team. I started correcting some of the mistakes that happened. So that, they happened kind of like a half a sentence. There was a mistake happening. I could correct it. I could say, there was one case where we were changing GUI components, for example. And they were asking out loud this question that, is it one or many? And, all the programmers in the room, they were like, yeah, it's one. Yeah, let's continue programming. Hey, what are you talking about? Are you talking about how many things the user will select in this GUI component? They're actually selecting a mix of these, and then I show them a scenario on how the actual users will use that. Ooh, that would be an expensive mistake if we would have implemented it with that assumption. And an hour later, when we were doing a retrospective, they didn't remember it without me reminding that it had happened. That's how powerful it is if the ego isn't in play and you can do it on the spot. Also, I a lot of times brought these ideas to my team about what's relevant, what is really the thing that we need to do. So when I got bored when they're, tweaking some little detail, I'm like, are we really, needing all of this? Then a lot of times out of that comes the discussion that, the users actually do this, and that is, a minor detail. They don't really care about that so much. So I could be the user's voice in many of those cases. Also, I was really afraid that I will slow everyone down because I am there to learn in that group. But I realized over that year that my slowness made them communicate clearer, but also they thought better. They decided what they wanted to do. They make it clear where we're going and heading so that the others would also understand. So when they tried to make space for me, they actually made space for themselves. So that was a great experience as well. And a lot of times I could also sneak my things in. As a tester, I'd like to see that we try different kinds of users. I'd like to see that we try different kinds of data. I'd like to see that we don't only test with the Chrome browser, which is the developer-friendly browser, at least was back then, but we would actually use the, everyone hates this, IE, and making them open that just in the right time, we would see things that would vanish and never actually show up again after that. So I could introduce also stealth exploration. But my real kind of end to this experience came with the idea that I had been doing this for over a year with my team on a weekly basis. I started to be, comfortable with code again. I started to feel like I might, survive with code. I might even, sometimes do that myself, especially around Selenium cases, implementing some automation there. And I decided to join a weekend-long all-female hackathon. Just, go there, nobody knows me, do something, we'll see. And I decided I will go there and I will never tell them that I'm a tester. I will just let them assume I'm a programmer. And I was really careful never to say what I actually do for my work. I was just, going there and like, you put me in whatever box you feel like, but I'm not giving you a box right now. I'm not giving you my identity. And what I then suggested for my 4-person team is that what if we would be mobbing on creating the Halloween hack game that we were supposed to create? And 3 of my 4 ladies said yes to this, and the 4th one says, this sounds like a waste of time, just give me some of the things to do. And how it turned out eventually is, well, I didn't get blown on my cover. They thought I was a programmer. When I told them in the end, they was, we didn't know. Like, we could not have noticed that. I was a full contributor in my 3-person team. And the most senior lady, the one who didn't want to spend time with any of the 3 of us who were doing the mob session of that, she only created graphics in the code because we were moving so fast with adding features that she was always behind us. And she couldn't contribute on the side of code, so she decided to do documentation and graphics, the most senior of our developers. And that was kind of sad that we couldn't get her to join, but it was also a very powerful message of how a mob works, that the 3 of us were smarter together. And these 3 ladies that I worked with, the middle one is also quite a senior front-end programmer, so we had a lot of help with having her around. But the other lady, in addition to me in this picture, she had never seen code in her life before that weekend. And what she said after that weekend, not only that she thought I was a programmer, just like the programmer in the group thought, but she also said that she felt the program was hers. It was her as much as of any other one. And that was a very relevant thing for her to experience, so that she had the courage to go forward. All the other all-female teams ended up with those who didn't program created the documentation. So we completely, in one weekend, reversed this dynamic by mobbing. And all these experiences really led me to this idea that we should call ourselves programmers a little more easily. It's not about being perfect. It's not about being professional even. If you've written code, that's your start of being a programmer. And programming, it's then just like testing. It's a thing that has so many layers forward. It's kind of like writing. You know, anyone can get started with it, but it actually takes years and years of practice to get really good at it, and it's never ending. Testing, programming, writing, they're all things like that. So we should give ourselves a little more credit on the things that we're already doing. And even if the programming wasn't my thing, in a mob, what I could do is that I could have an idea that I didn't know how to transfer that into code. I didn't know how to do the translation. But I had people who were close enough to me that they would actually listen to what I had to say, and they could help me do that translation. So that was a very powerful thing. So this was kind of like how I got into mob programming. And during this experience, it kind of rewrote my history into the idea that I can be not only a tester who is afraid of programming or doesn't, care for programming, but I can be both a tester and a programmer, and there's a certain support in those two roles. But I want to give you some ideas on how the mechanics of this actually works. The first idea is that you bring a group together, 6, maybe 8 people, maybe 10 people, whatever the number is that works for you. And instead of having all those people do solo work, like one doing things first and the other one doing things next, all of them work in the same space, in the same time, at the same problem, collaborating in a very tightly knit way. And this then means that if some of us individually, we have these, good moments, and we have these, not so good moments for various reasons, skills differences, how we feel about things right now, or all of these. In solo work, all of that ends up into the end result we're working on. And that's what testers usually do. We try to identify the curve of each developer and identify how they're strong and how they're weak. And especially, that's what we call risks. The developers don't know certain things or don't care to think of certain things, and they fail very often. We identify those and we come and clean up a little bit afterwards. But in mobbing, the idea is that we get the best out of everyone into the work we're doing in real time by having everyone available at that moment. So the roles or the dynamics on how this works, these are pictures from various mobs that I've done, usually outside my company. This is one in Helsinki last year. The roles are such that there usually is... Sorry, I need to show it this way. There's this fellow here, driver. Driver is the person who is not allowed to think, taking commands from the others. That's the rule. So it's the resting position in a mob. It's not the most scary position, even though it always feels like that. It's the resting position where if the others don't talk to you in a way that you understand, you don't do anything. That's the first rule. So we have a driver who doesn't think, can speak back, can ask for clarifications, can suggest to do things differently than they're told, so can, have a real personality, but doesn't make the decisions. That's the first rule, or the first role. The second role that there is that we have navigators. Usually, especially in practice mobs, we have someone we call designated navigator. So this person here standing up as far away from the keyboard as possible, needs to speak up so loudly that everyone in the group can hear, and so loudly that the person who is writing things on the keyboard will also hear. So that's why the physical distance is relevant. That person tells what needs to happen, and they tell that on the highest possible level of abstraction. If they tell that, you need to create a class that does this, and anything already happens, or everything happens by that, then you don't need to tell anything more. Then you just review that whatever you actually intended was happening. But if you need more detail, if movement doesn't happen, then you sink into location, Where is the thing that you need to do, where you need to go so that you get started, and then details, telling exactly what needs to be written, letter by letter, even if nothing else is or higher abstraction doesn't help you. This is also from Helsinki. This is one of the meetups, and it was great to see that in a programming meetup we were working on a Python, I think, on this one. 3 women, 2 men. That's what it's supposed to look like again. Women flock together. That's a real observation. All of these roles, or these 2 roles, or actually let's go back to this previous one still. The other ones in this group, these people who are sitting, they are also navigators. So when they want to speak, usually in the beginning they speak to the designated navigator who voices the decision, so that the driver doesn't have to listen to everyone. But over time, we grow so that people are considerate to others and don't speak on top of each other, but actually will, like everyone in the mob or in the navigators group can speak about this. So we have these roles of being a driver, being a designated navigator, or being just navigator in the mob. And we usually move around in the room, or at least if we have, a chair that is set for our own settings, we take the chair with us and you roll it in front of the keyboard. That's a typical thing to do. But we usually move about every 4 minutes. I've tried times of 2 minutes. It really helps sometimes create this idea that I can do my things. This is a group mind. We are all working on the same thing and bringing the best of each one of us into that. And I've sometimes seen some people use 15-minute timers, but that often lowers the energy in the room. So 4 minutes is a good time. This picture is from this Monday. So if anyone is recognizing themselves, I took a picture of you. You were an amazing group, really well learned to work in one day together. So that was a really fun exercise. Usually, then, after each session, like in the end of the day or in the end of a couple of hours of doing this, we have a retrospective, meaning we talk about what just happened, what did we notice that went on, was anyone uncomfortable, was anyone particularly delighted about something that happened. So that's very important, continuously learning. Make sure you make some space for that as well. And a common question that people ask is, what's the size of the group? This group is from Test Bash, Brighton. And I think I had 23 people in this group. It worked quite nicely. We rotated on 2 minutes, so the bigger the group, the shorter the time you get to spend on the keyboard. But the idea really is not that you have a fixed amount of people in the group, in a mob, but more on the side of if anyone or everyone who is there feels like they're contributing or learning, then the group is still the right size. If someone tunes out, they're not learning anymore, and they cannot contribute anything, either one of them, then you might want to split that group into smaller units. Then there's a rule, usually, that when you come up with 2 ideas, you don't stop and discuss them, but you actually do both of them. Make a list. Usually start with the one that is less likely to be the right one. And surprisingly often it happens so that the one that people would have thought hours and hours that it's not the right one to do, it actually, when it's been developed and coded and done, it turns out to be good enough and actually not so bad that it needed all that discussion against it. So play with that dynamic so that you have bias for action. That's kind of one of the things. This group is from a video from Hunter Industries, where mob programming started, so the company where Woody Zuili used to work. And Hunter has nowadays several mobs working in the same spaces. So they've really grown their company and brought in a lot of new people with this mechanism, and they still keep on working in that way. They just do it 8 hours every day. I did it a couple of hours every week. So my experience is more on the learning side. What I learned also then is that the best ideas usually then win. If you really care about the work over the credit. I've had numerous cases of arguing with some architect who knows that their status and knowledge means that this is the right way to do it. I'm like, it's gonna have bug, it's gonna be insecure. No, it's gonna be this way. But when you actually have to sit through implementing that, it creates a very different structure. So you usually get the better ideas into play that way. All of these dynamics, these are kind of like, getting started level ideas. Me and Luolan wrote a little guidebook. So if you go to LeanPub and you find this book there, you can just take it to zero, the price, and just download it. So it might be helpful on understanding some of the deeper dynamics that I can't address today in this talk. But as the last kind of idea into this talk, I really want to go back to the idea of osmosis and learning through osmosis. And mob is my way of like osmotically learning in that place. I don't really know what I go there to learn, but things just rub off. They get distributed so that we have more of an equal amount of things that we didn't used to have after we've worked together. So that's kind of a surprising thing. I've mobbed on all kinds of activities. In my previous company, I did a lot of programming in a mob. We also did quite much exploratory testing in a mob. And I was happy to see that all of my programmers turned to be brilliant exploratory testers. So it works both ways. I became a programmer, they became testers. And they became actually pretty good testers. I've done a lot of test automation, Selenium, API level testing, but also unit testing. Automation, sitting together with the mob. TDD I usually get to do in practice sessions. I have yet to work in a company that would be doing TDD in the real production code. So that's one of the things I really look forward to from my future. Application programming we did a lot, but in my current company, there's basically two kinds of activities that I've had people do now. We've done performance testing in a mob, and it made a huge difference in getting the message across on some of the severe problems we had just at the right time. It was a really good experience. But also we've done security testing, people having very different skill levels on what they know about security and develop those skills further. So it could be any kind of activity where you want the information to leak that you're doing in a mob format. I started talking about mob testing, kind of the idea that you go into a mob and you be a tester in the mob, and you don't think of the programmer identity. You don't need to give up your tester identity. You can be a tester in the mob, and you can do mob testing. And then it also then means that sometimes the activities are actually framed completely around testing, either automated testing or exploratory testing, which is manual as per how you usually command things or use the keyboard, but it's actually happening inside people's heads when we're making all those decisions that lead to the good information that we need to maybe find. The big thing that got to me through osmosis, I kind of found this term cognitive dissonance as I went to see a psychologist who decided if I could be applicable to a job that I didn't then accept. I talked to him about this more programming thing that I'm really into, and he said that it sounds like there's this phenomenon in play called cognitive dissonance. There's this idea that if you believe something very strongly, but then you do things that are against your beliefs, it makes you uncomfortable. And that uncomfort makes you learn. It makes you change. Either your beliefs change or your behaviors change. And for me, the whole idea of remembering again that I actually do enjoy programming. I actually always did. I had completely erased that memory. It came back, and now I need to face all the hard stuff around actually being a programming woman, because that is very different than being a tester woman in this industry. Testers are all mistreated in our organizations. That's what I've learned so far. When we go into a mob, there's also smaller things that we learn. There's this kind of like idea of accidental learning. We don't know exactly what we're teaching to the others, but we're doing something, and then it's like, oh, what did you just do? Like, you did that so fast. And then someone said, oh, there's this keyboard shortcut. Oh, I didn't know there was one. And would you go and ask this from someone? Like, do you know a keyboard shortcut that I can make me faster in a thing that I didn't know that can be made faster? No, that's not a question you would ask, right? So there's so many of these things that might be, you pick up things that other people do, and other people will tell you to do things in a mob, that then you realize that maybe I want to actually apply this elsewhere as well. So you don't have to be intentional about learning, but kind of like happens by serendipity, lucky accident, you will learn things that you then realize that now you have learned. This idea of learning continuously is kind of core to our industry. We get a lot of new people coming in. The size of industry doubles every 5 years. So there's always people who come in and start kind of like from a lower level. But the idea of learning is very, very powerful. If you spend an hour every day to learn, and you manage to get with that hour of investment, 1% improvement, 4 minutes into that one day, you cut 4 minutes into being able to do the things that you were doing before. It actually pays back already in 28 days. So less than a month if 1 hour is enough. But also, we were looking at this with Llewellyn in particular, you can actually use 5.5 hours out of your 8-hour workday to get that 1% improvement. And you will still be at the same place in a year and way ahead others later. So learning is a really, really powerful thing, and it cumulates. So you really need to think of it as finding ways of learning. And a lot of times people kind of feel like, I'm already better than you are, and they have this like linear viewpoint into what they can learn. But it actually isn't linear, it's multidimensional. There's so many things that you can be either better or worse at. And there's always something that you can learn from every person there is. And mobbing gives you a place where, through doing things, you can actually figure out what that thing might be. So I find that experts no longer are the ones who know the most, but they are the ones who learn the fastest. And mobbing is one way of learning. I invite you to do all the other mechanisms of learning, definitely. But don't dismiss this opportunity of learning through osmosis of the things you don't even know that you needed to ask the others. The others won't do a talk in conferences on the things they don't know that other people need, because they might think they're obvious. So this is a great mechanism for that. I wanted to finish with a very little story of my latest colleague and a teammate who is equal to me now. He's been in the company now for about 6 months, a little less than 6 months. He started in June. The first week when he joined us in June, I didn't get to mob with him, but I used the exact same mechanism of how we discuss things in a mob called strong style navigation, with the idea that he would sit on the keyboard, we would have a shared task that we were pairing on. I would tell him what to do on the highest possible level of intent, and when he didn't know what to do, I would tell exactly the details of what needed to happen. We spend a week doing this, retrospecting, reflecting, drawing architecture images of the things he had already experienced in practice. And what happened is that he is really a full member in my team. The difference here, strong style, is that kind of, if he had an idea, I would say, hey, now, I can take the keyboard, like it's your idea, I can do this for you. And I was actively making us change roles. But what this gave him, in the end of that 1 week, is that he said, I never knew testing would be this much fun. And he actually became a lot better at that. And I've heard comments from previous teams that he has volunteered with as part of his practices before joining our team. I've heard that they don't recognize him for the same boy and the same deliverables that he is doing now. So he clicked something, there was something that clicked. And what I'm particularly proud of is that on the Tuesday of that first week, he told me that he doesn't like programming. That was our lunch discussion. He doesn't care for programming, that's another thing he wants to do. On Wednesday morning, he showed up and said, I came here a little earlier because I wanted to start this JavaScript course. So apparently 50-year-old are, easier to convince than the older ones. And now, just a week ago, This is a quote from one of my teammates. It took him only 40 seconds for getting him his second automated Python test to get checked in through this whole pull request process, which involves other people, because he's learned to bring the team together and work in this way with him, so that he gets the information he needs so that he can learn through osmosis. So I can do it, he can do it, I believe that you can do it as well. People change their minds through experience, so that's kind of what I wanted to say as last thing. And there are people here, other than myself, who have done more programming. I met yesterday Philip. I took a picture of him. I wanted to add it to my last thing here. Philip has learned about this with me in Swiss testing days, I think earlier this year. And I really loved him sharing his experience with me in the idea that they had a lot of regulation before, and now that they're mobbing, they don't need all of that regulation because common things emerge. We have Lisil Hocke here. She's done that, more programming with her team. And there's a lady named Suzanne that I just accidentally found in the Women in Testing yesterday. She lives in a mob programming team full-time. Find her, talk to her. Find all of us, talk to all of us. So that's my message for today.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Questions?
Could you give an example of how mobbing works in a performance testing situation? Performance testing.
Performance testing. So what we did is we built or extended our toolset. We created scripts for performance testing. We identified some of the scenarios that we wanted to control, and then we were growing the loads and seeing what happened with the system. And we brought the developers from various teams into the mob that would fix it and tweak it in real time. So for me, it looks very much like it looks like as an individual work, but you just bring in more people and you share the context. And when 10 people say things are wrong, it's a lot stronger message than one person saying that.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. So, more questions? Yeah.
Hi, Maaret. I just want to find out what's the best way to convince your team to actually adopt more programming. Is it via stats or via your slides?
I don't know, really. I have to say, I don't know what's the best way to get teams to try this. Because my current team doesn't want to do this. When we did this once, they got stuck with a particular tweak in JavaScript. 5 developers couldn't get things done. And all 5 were still convinced that they would have been faster alone. 5 smart people couldn't figure it out together, but they were sure they would have figured it out alone. So I don't know how I will convince them, but I will do this with the people who want to try it. And my main rule is, if someone doesn't want to do it, it's better to let them be outside. I had a colleague who didn't want to join us, and after half a year of seeing how we partied once a week, we had a great time together, he said, can he join? So start with people who want to do it, have fun, make the fun visible. That's the best thing that I can give you.
More questions? Okay. Thanks so much.
All right.